and welcome to the shed. In today's video we're going to be doing the initial setup of the brand new Luban Bedrock hand plane. Hope you enjoy. If you haven't seen the video where I did the initial unboxing, I will leave that link down below for you guys. So what we determined in that video, if you haven't watched it, is that all the machining on this is in very good tolerances. So what I believe is going to be required for the initial setup of this plane is we will check the sole to ensure that what I found was correct with the feeler gauges, and we know we need to do some work on the chip breaker and on the blade. Pretty much everything else I don't think actually requires to go on a stone. Now I could check them, but I've already done that initial checking and I'm confident that there's nothing wrong with them. So if you haven't seen that video, do go check it out, because I go through practically everything on this plane just so you know how it is out of the box. So what I thought we'd do is, before we actually tackle the blade and the chip breaker, is that we're going to check the sole to ensure that it is as flat as I thought it was, which was 0.0015 of an inch or 0.038 of a millimeter, and that tolerance pretty much held true for the entire sole other than one little spot. So looking at the sole of the plane here, we can see this little area here, which was where I found the ever so slight low spot of point something of a millimeter. Normally we wouldn't even worry about that, but in this case I'm going to double check how flat the entire sole of this plane is. Now to do that, we're going to put some lines of Sharpie across here in a grid pattern, which we'll do in a second, and I'm going to run the plane on my most aggressive 400 grit diamond stone. What this is achieving here is to just double check those results. So we grab the Sharpie, and I'm probably putting one of these marks, well, the gap doesn't matter too much, but it's essentially every maybe 10 mil, something like that. So you want a relatively complete grid on the bottom here. One thing to remember is that this blade is fully retracted. It's clamped in here, which supposedly keeps the whole bed under tension. I'm not sure that's 100% true, but that's what everybody says. And so that's in here, and the blade is completely retracted because we don't want to damage our blade checking this. Now what I've got set up here is the stone on top of some paper towel, because I'm going to put a little bit of water on this, because it's best to use these diamond stones lubricated. And I've just got it all pushed up against a bench dog just so it doesn't move. So we're going to come in, reference the front of it, and push it forward a few times. Now you can go back and forwards, but I like to keep going in one direction with it, especially because I'm up against my bench dog. So comparing this against the flatness of the diamond stone, what we've done is remove material on these outside edges in here and not right in the middle. Now what that indicates is that this diamond stone is actually extremely flat for referencing, which is great. But we can also see that we do have an ever so slight dip in the middle here, and that was a slight discrepancy that using the feeler gauge, when you try to do that and be technical with it, it doesn't pick up. Whereas running it straight on some surface, you can actually find what flat is very, very quick. So now we know that a little bit of flattening needs to be done on the sole of the plane. I've gone ahead and brought my usual sharpening platform down here, some 120 grit sandpaper on a piece of melamine on my flat workbench so it's held dead flat. And so the blade is retracted as it was before. And you can see I'm holding it down low here on both sides to ensure that I keep contact with the surface. And if we look here, we can see fairly uniform scratch pattern on here. The little hash grid is still ever so slightly visible, so we're just going to run it back and forwards a few more times. Along with flattening that, and one thing you want to do with most of these hand planes out of the box is take these hard edges off all the way around. And so while we've got this here, you can just lift it like this do the other side. Once they're rolled, you just want to deal with the toe and the heel. And that captured that heel. Now we've flattened the base and we've got it ready to go. Now we can go ahead and take the blade and the chip breaker out, because if you looked at my other video you would have seen that the frog was mating perfectly, so I don't really want to mess with that. The blade was running perfectly on the frog, so I really don't even want to mess with that. And I know the tolerances were really fine, and we've confirmed that those tolerances are pretty good even on the sole, because the frog and the mating had those same sort of references, so there's not really any point in doing any machining on the frog because it's not necessary. You could run it on there, but all it's going to do is rough up the nice machine they've already got there. So now what we want to do is check out the blade and also the chip breaker. So we're going to come in here and we're going to look at the blade. Apologies there, the camera went out and I didn't realise. So I've already done partially that initial flattening. But I've gone ahead, I put black lines on the back here, and now we're going to get to work on here. So I'm going to wet it. That's the beauty of full access here. We can run the blade right up and down this side, which is excellent. So we're going to come in, and I'm actually running the entire distance here just to see how flat this is. And I'm going to push down here and go back and forwards about 20 times. So as you can see here, we've taken material off the top here and off the back here, and we have this slight hollow here, which means that we could actually go ahead and use this how it is here with that flat part. I want to try and see how long it's going to take to remove this. And it's important when you do this that you keep it in that same alignment the entire time you're sharpening, because if you're moving in and out, you affect where you're referencing on the blade, and you want to keep that the same as much as possible. If we have a quick look at this now, we can see that it's half that amount again. So I'm going to go on here for another few minutes. And in total so far I've probably only spent about 5 minutes on this, so we can see that this is flattening out real quick and easy. After another few minutes we can see we've still got this little section in the middle here, and I'm not going to go any further than this. This is more than serviceable, and in however many years it takes me to take out that amount of the blade, I can then flatten that little bit in the center a little bit easier. So it's no big deal to actually have to go any further than that, because this is perfect. This is exactly what we're looking for. So now what I'm going to do is instate my 30-degree bevel. Now, because this is already at 25 degrees and a 30-degree bevel is actually steeper, what I'm going to do, instead of regrinding the entire bevel, because there's no real need to do that, normally I don't use micro bevels, but on a new blade like this where I establish my 30-degree bevel on it, I just run that as a micro bevel until it becomes the full bevel, and I don't have to regrind it, and it's going to work just the same as a full 30-degree bevel. Most of you will be familiar with the Veritas honing jig. Fence set at 30 degrees, matching the colour up here, down on here, and that's how you get your angle. And you turn these clamps upside down, make sure they're open to receive the blade, and then we slide it in, and it's always going to reference off this side of the blade. So if you do put it on a grinder, you have to bear in mind the referencing. If it doesn't match the tool you're using, it might be a little more difficult to operate. And so we clamp one side down so it holds it, and then I clamp the other side down until that stops moving. And we've got it referenced nice and tight up against the little fence on this jig. Now we can remove it, and we're going to come in and sharpen. So with the bevel blackened like you can see right here, we're going to come to the stone. Now, clean off any of this stuff that was here from doing the back of the blade. You want your stone nice and clean, and that's a good way to actually keep diamond stones clean, is to keep wiping them back. So I'm just going to squirt some water across all of them because we're going to use all these grits. So I'm going to come in, ensure you have your flat roller on here, And the camber roller, if you want to roll the corners of your blade, that's what I recommend, or you can freehand it. So we come in and let's go back and forwards 5-6 times. And if we look at the very tip here, we can see that we've actually already gone full length, and that's actually all we have to do. It hasn't quite come right out to this angle here, so I'm going to have to run it a few more times because I'm feeling for the burr along here, and I can feel there's no burr right out on this corner, which means we just need to sharpen it for a few seconds longer. So now that I've done a few runs more, I'm just going to feel for that burr. We have that burr all the way along there now, which means we can come to the next stone here. And I'm just going to overhang this so the top of my sharpening jig doesn't grab it, and I'm just going to go back and forwards a few times like that. Let's remove the burr, so now we can sharpen on this one here. And now we're just feeling for the burr. We have a burr. Once again, I'm just feeling for this burr again. Just a couple more passes. Now I can remove that burr. So now that burr is removed. Now we can go to the strop to polish the last of it out and make sure there is no burr left. So to do this, I just freehand it. The beauty of this is if you want to turn it this way and work it like this, it's a little bit easier. So do this about, I don't know, 50 times. So you can see how shiny that edge is on there now. Now we can just do the back. Same again, 50 passes. I'm happy with how shiny that is. And now I go 2 on the top, 2 on the back, 1 on the top, 1 on the back, 1 on the top, 1 on the back, 1 on the top, 1 on the back. And that's just rocking any burr that might be there out of the way. And if you're very careful, you can run it along your nail, and if it catches your nail, just a little tiny dig. Now, you might not want to do this regularly, but it is a good little check. And the other check is you can look down on it. If you see no light bouncing back up, you know that you've got a nice sharp blade there. So now, I think we need to look at that chip breaker. What we're going to do here is sharpen this entire bevel out on the stone. So what we can do is use a few techniques for freehanding and getting this right. So find your angle wherever you feel comfortable. If you feel that you have to sit it out a little bit, so you're right here, you want your comfort lock here, so as you move forward you can actually hold it at the angle you want. I like to cant it slightly like this, lock my elbows in against my side, and then rock my whole body backwards and forwards. And I've got even pressure as well as I can with 2 fingers. If you want to add some more fingers in on there you can, but I prefer 2. Let's look at that. You can still see hopefully a few of these machining lines, so a little bit more work is required. So far I've probably only pushed it back and forwards on this aggressive 400 grit diamond stone maybe 15-20 times, so you can see it's not going to take long to do this. Most of those big lines are now gone, and so now we want to go through the grits, and by the time we finish that, those little fine lines that are there are probably going to be gone. And if they're not, well, it doesn't really affect how the plane works. So it's really up to you as to how far you want to go. All you really need is a sharp line right along the very edge, because all that's doing is making sure there's a sharp connection between the back of your blade and your chip breaker, so knocks the chip away, and it doesn't really have to be polished out like a blade. It's good to give it a bit of a polish, but you only really need it right on that very fine edge. So a little more water. Now I'm looking at this to see if I've got the entire scratch pattern. It looks like I have. Just in case I haven't, I'm just going to go another few passes. Now it's okay if you do rock around on this. I'm not saying that I'm getting this perfect, but I am getting to a cutting edge right on the edge, and that's what you want. You want that nice and sharp. Now what we were doing here was just removing that the mill marks off here. Now I flatten the back, and then we'll come back onto the finest stone, give that bevel a sharpen until you feel a little burr, and then you know you got that perfect. So we set it like this, and you want to hold this within 5-6 mil of the edge of your stone. Now you can spray this, get a little water on there, and you're referencing the back of it on the bevel side of your blade, because when you turn it up this way you don't want to see scratches on your blade. And then what we want to do, so I'm referencing my fingers just on the very edge there, just keeping pressure down on it. So if we look at this, we can see there's still a slight high spot, well, a slight spot here, which is not touching right over to this very edge. So what we want to do is keep going until we actually get all the way out here. What we're doing is getting that a flat reference in relation to the back of the chip breaker, which means that it's going to sit square and flat with your blade the way you want it to. And just make sure you get it back in that same spot reference so your angle's the same. So now we've removed that material all the way along there. Just trying to get the angle alight. So there's no machining marks anywhere along here, which means this is actually nice and flat now. But what we do want to do is make sure that this bevel here is marking nice and tight with it. Now, if I put this on my nail, it's not actually taking a cut at the moment, which means that it's not dead sharp on this edge, which to get to that fine point, it really has to be sharp. So that means we're going to go back to our sharpening setup. I'm going to go to the fine stone and I'm going to sharpen this until I feel a burr on the back here. Now, if this is a problem for you and you can't keep that square enough and right on the angle to get it freehand, it doesn't really matter if you change this angle ever so slightly with the chip breaker, because on the traditional ones the angle is actually a little bit steeper than what you get on these, so you could change that angle ever so slightly to match an angle on your sharpening gauge if you can't line it up and get it to actually sit dead flat and square. So if you don't know the angle with something like this, you can actually bring it in and rest it in your jig until it sits flat, and then what I'm going to do is we're going to lock that in place, and we can see that we've got this bevel all the way along. You can see that the entire bevel is sitting flat on your stones. That you get a nice angle on your bevel if you're worried about freehanding it. And this is certainly a lot easier once you've matched that angle, and you could do this right from the start if you wanted to. So once that's done, you want to come back to the setup you had here and just remove that burr. So you can see here, although it's not even with the hand sharpening, it's referenced from the front to the back and it's square along here. If we look down from the top, there's no light shooting back, which means that we've got that nice and sharp, and there's just the two different ways of doing it. But if you do freehand it, I'd suggest you continually freehand it. If you do use your jig, keep your jig, use your jig for it. And that, we obviously want to polish this out. So now we want to fit it, so I loosely get it so the blade fits on here. We spin it around and we push it up to however far we want it from the edge. In this case, I go about 1.5 millimeters. Double check the distance stays the same and that it's square, and then lock it up. Now we want to do our check with light along the front which is a little bit tricky to do on these blades, but you want to look through that little tiny gap and see that you see no light along that cutting edge, which in my case I don't. So we're good to put it into the blade. So we're good to put the blade assembly back into the plane and take a shaving. But one thing you need to bear in mind is this little bit here where the frog sits. That's sitting about 3 millimeters back from the back of the throat, and that's how it came in the box, like that. I adjusted it thinking it had to be in complete alignment, like I'm used to with the thin blades on the traditional Stanley Baileys, and it didn't work. It wouldn't actually fit in the mouth. So this is designed to sit back about that distance. My guess is to clear the thickness of the blade assembly in there, and so when it does that, it actually clears past it and allows the blade to operate. And you could really advance this blade out if you really wanted to, but you'd have to sit it back even further to do so. So this is for even a mid-sized cut. You could advance this blade out probably about 2 or 3 millimeters, which is way too far, so that's not a problem. So to put the blade in, the easiest way is to lift it like this, sit it on, rock it back and forwards, make sure it's engaged, make it sure it's sitting down on the yoke here, move it back and forwards, make sure it's fully seated. So I've got a piece of knotty pine here, so we'll bring it down and we want to adjust it until we just start taking a shaving, which I've got here, this very fine wispy shaving. And this seems to be coming out fairly even, and it's quite fine. And we can see we're actually getting very nice full-length shavings here, which is pretty impressive on such knotty pine. So there you have it, folks. That's my initial setup on the Luban Bedrock hand plane. And as you can see, if you've seen the original video, and I will leave that link down below to the original unboxing, we didn't really have to do much work in flattening the sole of the plane. In actual fact, it really didn't need to be flattened at all. But that's why I used the diamond stone, so you could see that it does show up even the finest of discrepancies if you got a nice flat stone. And so that didn't take long. That was all of about 5 minutes to flatten the bottom, maybe 2 or 3 minutes to flatten the back of the blade, and to sharpen it all up about another 5 minutes. And preparing the chip breaker, that probably took about 10 minutes because we did have to remove that heavy machining, and if you've got finer stones than my diamond stones, that's going to take you a little bit of time. But all in all, really inside maybe half an hour max, I think, and this was in an operational state. And you could see that in the end we took some nice fine shavings on some really terrible pine here, and it cut straight through the middle of the knots as well, which means that this plane is going to be very great for figured wood. It's got a nice tight mouth, which is how it actually came straight from the store. So if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing down below. And while you're down there, please sound off in the comments whether you've got a Luban and prepared it, or if you reckon that inside half an hour is actually a good prep time, because I would consider that not much prep time at all. And if you want to see some more setup videos such as this, please check out the one up here where I set up the brand new Stanley Bailey hand plane. And I'm also going to leave the video here where I went in a little more depth in preparing a Luban blade and chip breaker for the original Stanley Bailey. So that's just some more in depth on the way I set it up here for you today. Bye for now.